In 1955, when my mother became pregnant with me, they were living in Baltimore, and my father was determined that his firstborn child would not be born a Yankee. So they moved to New Orleans just long enough for me to be born. They decided to move to Campty to be near my grandparents. And I started first grade at Campty High School, a school that was first through 12th grades. I played on the same stage in the rhythm band in first grade that I walked across to graduate as valedictorian in high school. In 7th grade, I played Richard Nixon in a mock presidential debate and decided then that I wanted to be president of the United States. And I thought about what was the best way to become president, and it seemed to me that all or most presidents had been lawyers. So I decided then that I wanted to be a lawyer. Because my parents were very poor, it would not be an easy thing for me to become a lawyer. I knew that I would have to make good grades. I knew that I would have to save my money. I knew that I would have to earn a scholarship in order to go to college, because nobody in my family had ever even been to college. I did make a good score on the ACT, and I had a 4.0 grade point average, so I was one of the 4 scholarships that the state gives to Northwestern. It was a full ride scholarship. That there was a scholarship to Tulane Law School, but it was given to the best male pre-law student in the class. And I was the first woman to be awarded that scholarship. I guess by 1976, they decided times were a-changing and it was time to give it to a woman if the best pre-law student was a woman. Even with a $3,000 scholarship to Tulane, it was still cheaper to go to LSU, so I decided I would go to LSU. At 20, I left Northwestern and started to law school at LSU. And I was engaged to Joe Stephenson, who is now my husband of 45 years, and he was living in Shreveport. And we swapped out weekends. I would drive to Shreveport one weekend, he would drive to Baton Rouge the next, and after a semester of that, we made the decision maybe I should postpone law school for a little while. It ended up taking me 4 years before I got back to law school, but that turned out to be a very good decision, because in the meantime, I got a job as a legal secretary with the law firm in Shreveport that's now Cook, Yancey, King, and Galloway, working for Gordon Roundtree. And Mr. Roundtree saw something in me, and he convinced the law firm to send me to paralegal school at LSU Shreveport, to pay for me to take the notary exam and the notary review class. And I passed the notary exam and learned so much. When he left the law firm and went out on his own, I went with him, became his paralegal, wrote most of his appellate briefs, and learned so much about the actual practice of law and got a lot of great writing experience. And that served me very well when I went back to law school. When I was in law school the first time, I was scared to even raise my hand. But the second time around, I had been around lawyers for 4 years. I felt confident. I would raise my hand, and based on what I knew, I was able to answer the questions. So I must have made an impression on some of my classmates, because immediately people started coming up wanting me to be in their study groups. So, but the one person that I met on the very first day of law school the second time around, Linda Fowler, ended up being someone who, well, we've been best friends for 40 years, and she had a part to play in me becoming a law professor. Was able to get a clerkship with federal judge Frank Palazzolo in Baton Rouge, and I accepted the clerkship after my 3rd semester in law school. Then in January of my senior year, I found out I was pregnant and due around Labor Day, and my clerkship was supposed to start August 1st. So I was really worried that I would lose my clerkship. I didn't know what was going to happen because in 1984, you know, there was not quite the pregnancy protection that there is now. So I made an appointment to meet with him so I could tell him about it. He was so nice. He immediately called the clerk of court, ordered him to come to his office with every insurance policy that was available to federal employees and look through them all and find one that did not have pregnancy as a pre-existing condition, which was a thing in 1984, which he did find one. And he told me I could start to work when I was supposed to and take off, you know, as long as I needed for maternity leave. I worked up until the day my son was born, August 28th. I was in labor most of the day, that I was the last day at work, but I had an opinion to finish and I stayed there until I finished it. Then I went to a regularly scheduled doctor's appointment I had that afternoon, called the judge from home and said, I'm in labor, I'm waiting for my husband to get home before I go to the hospital, because my husband was a salesman, a manufacturer's rep, and he was in Opelousas that day. So Judge Palazzolo beat me to the hospital. He had them searching the entire hospital up and down the corridors, checking to see maybe they'd misspelled my name, but we actually didn't go to the hospital till 9 o'clock that night. And in the meantime, I think he had the federal marshals out looking for me in the hospital. I wanted to do litigation, but my son was still only 2 years old. And so I decided that taking another clerkship would be a better thing to do. So I went to work for Judge Melvin Shortis at the First Circuit Court of Appeal. He had taught me trial practice at LSU, remembered me very well because I had called him out on something he said in class. He told me he hired me because he didn't want a yes man. He wanted someone who would tell him if he was making the wrong decision as a judge. And so he said that was why he hired me. So I worked for him for 2 years and then went into practice. And I was doing insurance and corporate defense, traveled all over the state. I loved doing litigation. In fact, I took a deposition on my 4th day on the job and tried and was admitted in all the federal courts and really enjoyed that. But my son was very accident prone, and he broke both legs, had to have stitches twice, was hospitalized with asthma twice during the 3 years that I practiced. And I went to lunch with Judge Shortis, and he suggested that maybe I should come back to work for him. He had an opening for a permanent clerk. I left law practice and went back to work for Judge Shortis. Now, doing that gave me a lot of free time working at the court to write. So I was a member of the publications committee for the Baton Rouge Bar, and I wrote articles for the magazine, and I started writing a grammar column in 1995 that I am still writing. While working at the First Circuit, I met Judge Freddie Pitcher. And Judge Pitcher left the First Circuit to become the chancellor at Southern University. He called me up and told me that he was wanting to improve the writing program at Southern. And he wanted to establish the position of legal writing director, and he encouraged me to apply. So I did. That was in 2004. So I left the court and began my career in academia. Okay, so one of the first things I did when I became legal writing director was find someone to teach in the evening program. We just started the evening program that year in 2004. And I called my friend Linda Fowler. But when Linda and I first started at Southern, it was a little bit of culture shock, because in our law school class at LSU, we had 5 African American students in our class. Only 1 graduated with us. And, you know, Southern is like 60% African American. So we didn't have much trouble adapting, but it was culture shock. So the first 2 articles that we wrote, well, I wrote something for a national legal writing publication, a short article, and then we collaborated on a law review article about cultural competency, and we took it on the road and went to 5 different legal writing conferences around the country talking about that. But after that, I concentrated on writing about Louisiana civil procedure, damages for frivolous appeals, the custom as a source of law, and I did also write an article about the civil law notaries, because I had become something of an expert on civil law notaries. I have been a consultant for the Louisiana notary exam for the past 20 years. I help write the exam. I've helped grade the exam, review the appeals. It still has only like less than 20% pass rate, but that's one of the things that I have written on, and I'm still involved with that. In Oklahoma, I wrote about Ada Sipuel and how she was one of only 2 people who sued to enter a law school, a white law school, and actually graduated from there and practiced law. She and Donald Murray from Maryland. So I learned that her parents had lived in Tulsa, and at Tulsa at the time of the race massacre. And that influenced her to become the civil rights activist that she was, and to volunteer to be the person to integrate the University of Oklahoma. So when I learned that there was going to be a symposium in Tulsa to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the massacre, and I wrote an article on tying the massacre to Ada Sipuel and how the massacre influenced her, and spoke at their symposium in May. I joined the Baton Rouge Association of Women Attorneys while I was still in law school, and I became president of that organization in 1995. I've also been very involved with the Baton Rouge Bar Association. I received the President's Award for my involvement in the Publications Committee, all the work that I've done over the years writing and editing the Bar magazine, and also for my involvement with Holiday Star. Holiday Star is the program where the Bar Association provides gifts to underprivileged children at Christmas. I got involved with that because I very vividly remember the Christmas that the Sheriff's Department knocked on my door, knocked on our family's door, and asked, "Is this where the crippled man lives?" and handed my mother a box of toys. My mother was very upset. She was a proud woman, and this you know, she didn't think we needed any help, but the kids were very happy to get the toys. So I've been involved with Holiday Star program practically since its inception. Held every position that the Baton Rouge Bar Association has, you know, secretary, treasurer, vice president, president, pastor, everything. So 10 years on the board and filling all the offices. Now, while I was on the board, every year the board gets to nominate someone for the Louisiana Bar Foundation's Distinguished Professor Award. And for probably the last 5 years I was on the board, they kept saying, we want to nominate you, we want to nominate you. And I'm like, no, I am not going to, you know, be a self-nominee for this. So the first year after I cycled off the board, they nominated me, and I won and received the recognition for the 2014 Bar Foundation's Distinguished Professor. And that was pretty much a highlight of my academic career. I hope that my students will remember me as somebody who really sincerely cared about them and their success and wanted them to succeed.